Hey everyone, and welcome to Skill-Capped. In this guide, we'll be ranking all agents on the brand new patch 2.1. Now, this tier list won't be just based on one person's opinion, but instead is based on trends in the highest ranks of solo queue and tournament statistics. The goal here is to provide you with the most accurate snapshot of the current agent meta in Valorant. And I promise you'll be surprised by a few of the agent rankings on this list. Alright, now for the question of the day. If you got to buff one agent in the game, who would it be and how would you buff them? For me personally, I'd love a small Viper buff, specifically a change directed at either her wall or Poison Cloud. Maybe after 30 seconds she can redeploy her wall elsewhere, same idea with her Poison Cloud, maybe you can redeploy without picking it up after a certain amount of time. But what do you guys think? What agent would you buff and what would you change about them? Let me know in the comment section below, as I'm really interested what the community has to say. Alright, so let's jump straight into it. We'll be starting from the weakest agents in the D tier first, and then the S tier and overpowered agents last, so make sure you watch until the end. So starting off in the D tier, and surprise surprise, we actually don't think any agent is weak enough to be placed in this tier right now. And this really speaks to how much better the balancing of the game has become over time. But who wants to look at an empty tier list, so let's move straight up into the C tier. Starting us off at the bottom of the C tier, we have the agent Skye. Now, I know some of you are already surprised by this pick, but I promise, there are stats backing this up. She is rarely picked in pro play or in top-ranked solo queue, and she's been out long enough for her being a new agent to no longer be skewing these stats. Additionally, most high-ranked players and pros would agree that Skye is a bit on the weaker side. However, bottom of the C tier may seem a bit extreme, so why did we place her here? Well, it's because Skye is really one of the worst agents to solo queue with, and it's the fact that both of her initiating abilities, her Guiding Light and Trailblazer, can't effectively be peeked off of by herself. For example, if you use Trailblazer, you're locked in, standing still, so you can't swing off it. If you concuss an enemy, you'll need a teammate to do that. Her Flash Guiding Light has the same problem, but you can try to peek off the Flash by hitting fire to send it forward. Then you don't guide it and instead run into position to peek and then activate. Then you peek once the enemies are flashed, but it's just very awkward. And this is because when you go to reactivate your bird to flash the opponent, you swap off your gun into an animation, which then delays your ability to peek as you have to wait for your gun to come back out. At the same time, all of her abilities can be destroyed, her ultimate Seekers, her Hawk, her Tiger, and to be honest, the Tiger and Seekers are a bit on the weak side. I'm sure many of you have encountered in your own games where Skye drops her ultimate, and then you just quickly destroy all three of the Seekers while they're grouped up, and boom, her ultimate's gone. It's the same idea with the Tiger. With its limited vision range, you can often just destroy it without it really getting much intel or landing the concussion effect. I would not be surprised if we see some buffs to her in the future, especially to her Tiger and ultimate. Now moving on, above Skye in the C tier, we have an agent I'm sure many of you were expecting, Viper. Viper has been a staple of the D tier for a long time, but finally she's received enough buffs that she's ascended into the C tier. And she definitely deserves that rise, as we've seen her become a staple pick on Icebox, beating out all of the other controllers in the European pro scene. We've also seen her picked on Bind about 50% of the time in the European pro scene as well. However, that's one of her core problems. She's very map dependent right now, basically only viable in the higher levels of play on Bind and Icebox. Do keep in mind though, with Omen nerfs on patch 2.0 and Jett nerfs to her smokes on 2.1, that does leave room for Viper to rise in power levels, since the main thing she provides is vision denial. In fact, if Brimstone didn't get such a massive buff on patch 2.0, I could totally see Viper possibly even hitting B tier, but given that Brimstone is very strong right now, and the Omen nerfs were not big enough to drop him significantly, she's definitely a C tier agent. And before we jump into the B tier, remember what you find here on our YouTube channel is just a taste of the hyper improvement system on our website skillcapped.com. It's there, you'll not only find over 700 premium Valorant guides organized in structured courses that are easy to follow and optimized to help you improve as fast as possible. But we also have an expanding library of live Smurf commentaries, a feature that no one else is offering. These are by some of the top Valorant players breaking down how you too can climb out of every rank in Valorant, ranging from Iron to Diamond. All of this can be unlocked with no risk with our rank improvement guarantee. So click the link in the description below, head to skillcapped.com, and get the rank you've always wanted while supporting what we do. Alright, so jumping into the B tier, coming in at the bottom is our friendly neighborhood healer Sage. Sage used to not only be a top tier pick, but she actually used to be overpowered. However, repeated nerfs and changes to her abilities have resulted in her dropping down. Now, don't get me wrong, if you're a Sage main and you like her, keep playing her, as she's a solid pick. This is the B tier after all, agents here are solid, it's not like they're weak. In fact, one of Sage's biggest strengths is the fact that you can pretty much play her on all maps as she has a very stable power curve. This allows you to just focus on maining her and not have to have a backup pick for different maps. And speaking of maps, I have to say one of her strongest right now is the new map Icebox. We actually released guides specifically on her best walls and slow orb lineups and where to position for Sage on Icebox, and it's for a good reason. She's very strong on the map, and on defense she can just wall off Tube in a way that makes it impossible to destroy, which is just insanely valuable. So yeah, solid pick, but spoiler alert, we're kind of in a duelist meta right now, and so you often want at least one smoke agent, then you want a sentinel like Cypher or Killjoy, and that doesn't leave a lot of room for a Sage pickup when you can just lock in 3 duelists. Next up in the B tier, we have a bit of a controversial placement. It is Brimstone. Now, we had a lot of internal dialogue on this one, with many thinking he's a top A tier agent. And in many ways, I completely agree. His buffs were insanely strong, and he's now a fantastic pickup. So what is he doing at the top of the B tier? Well, it has to do with 2 things. First, Omen, despite his nerfs, is still better as a controller pick overall, and definitely the better pick in a solo queue environment due to more carry potential with his blind and teleport. Second, Brimstone is a very utility-centered agent, but that utility doesn't necessarily open himself up to set up kills for himself. For example, think of Cypher or Killjoy. Yes, these are heavy utility agents, but their utility can set up kills. With that being said though, I have to mention one thing. His Stim Beacon is absolutely insane with the Stinger. The Stinger itself is overpowered right now. Check out our gun tier list if you're not in the know, but combining that insane fire rate of a Stinger with the attack speed boost from Brimstone's Stim Beacon is actually the most broken thing in the game. So if you're a Brimstone player and you have not been taking advantage of this combo, you're welcome to go queue up ranked right now and get some of those free points. Essentially, Brimstone's problem is that he's a bit too much of a support agent in a duelist-centered meta, something we'll be breaking down in more detail later in this guide. Alright, and that's it for the low to mid ranks. I know, a bit surprising, but the agent roster right now for Valorant is actually pretty solid. So this leads us into the A tier, and at the bottom of it we have the newest agent, Yoru. Now, I know as a high outplay potential agent that sometimes that can give off the impression that he may be overpowered. But if you ask pretty much any pro or high ranked player, none of them will say that he's actually OP. That being said, he's definitely not weak either. Here are the main reasons though why he's at the bottom of the A tier. First, he requires a high amount of skill to pilot. Compare his Flash to Phoenix Flash or Reyna Blind, Omen Paranoia, Breach Flash, and you'll realize that it's actually very similar in power level, maybe even a bit weaker, while being much harder to execute. When you combine this with his teleport ability, which if used incorrectly can actually just get yourself killed, you start to realize just how much skill is involved in not only playing him well, but just not being a detriment to the team. In addition to this, his fake out ability will actually do nothing if you don't know how to mind game opponents and use it properly. Speaking of which, we have a brand new Yoru course on our website, skillcap.com, link in the description by the way, with 7 brand new Smurf commentaries of him. When you compare Yoru to the stronger duelists on this tier list, you'll realize why he's at the bottom of the A tier. He can be hard to execute, doesn't have self-heal, and doesn't have damaging abilities. Still, I can't think of a better spot to really have a brand new agent than in the A tier, which really speaks to how well he's balanced on release. Next up in the A tier we have Cypher. This is actually a big deal, as Cypher has been at least an S tier agent, sometimes even overpowered, all throughout Valorant's history. However, repeated nerfs dropped his power level, and finally, the fact that Split got a huge rework on patch 2.1. Keep in mind that Split was by far Cypher's strongest map, and all of these map changes directly nerfed his setups, which were why he was so powerful on Split in the first place. So with him now being weaker on his strongest map, we think that it's fair to put him in the middle of the pack in A tier. And this leads us to our last Sentinel, Killjoy, which barely edges out above him in the A tier. In terms of pro play, Cypher and Killjoy have been pretty much close to a 50-50 pick rate across all the maps and very close in power levels. Specifically, Killjoy would be picked more on Icebox and Ascent, while Cypher would be picked more on Bind and Split. And then both agents were about 50-50 on Haven. However, with these split changes indirectly making Cypher weaker, and with a noticeable trend in Killjoy starting to ramp up in pick rate in pro play, we think it's accurate to put her ever so slightly above Cypher right now. With that being said, if we're honest, these two agents are extremely close in strength, so take Killjoy being one position higher with a bit of a grain of salt. And finally, leading at the top of the A tier, we have the blind machine known as Breach. There is a good reason why Breach is at the top of the A tier, and it's because he's bordering on being an S tier agent as well. Ever since his flurry of buffs a while back, his pick rate has steadily increased in each pro tournament. In fact, a lot of the pro teams run one of the strongest combos in Valorant, Breach, and Jett. To execute this combo, Breach flashes in, then Jett dashes off the flash to kill any enemies that were blinded. This combo has proven to be insanely effective. However, unlike other agents higher on the list, Breach is a bit map dependent. His strongest map by far is Split. He's almost always picked on that map by all pro teams in all regions. I'm being serious right now. If you're a Breach main and you aren't just insta-locking him on split, you're definitely doing something wrong. However, on Bind, Haven, and Ascent, he's only picked around 50% of the time over other flash agents to fill that role. And on Icebox, he's pretty much never picked. It's this inconsistent power curve across maps combined with him being a little bit more support orientated, which isn't the best in solo queue. That's why he's at the top of the A tier. Alright, and finally we're at the S tier agents. Bringing up the bottom of the S tier is the duelist Raze. Raze is kind of in a weird spot, as once upon a time before nerfs, she was the queen of all duelists. However, after those nerfs, her pick rate dropped significantly, but the Raze mains that stuck with her were still performing great. Essentially, she's kind of underrated right now, at least in the mid to high ranks. Now, one of the core reasons why she's not higher in the tier list is the same problem that Breach has, an inconsistent power curve across the map pool. Specifically, she's insanely strong on Bind and Split. In pro play, she's often just insta-locked on those maps. On Icebox, she's a bit average, but still picked, but it's on the wider open maps like Ascent and Haven that she struggles a lot more. But I do use that word struggle lightly, because in reality, she's still strong on those maps, it's just nothing in comparison to the borderline overpowered strength on Split and Bind. Next up in the S tier, we have Sova. Now, if this was strictly a pro scene tier list, we would place Sova in the overpowered tier. He's a unique agent that no other agent can replace and is basically an essential pick in every single team composition. He has one of the highest pick rates overall in the pro scene, and if you were trying to go pro, well, my advice would be to practice Sova, because every single pro team needs a Sova main right now. With all that being said, he does have a few weaknesses that resulted in this placement. First, he sucks on the map Split. He's horrendous. Don't lock him in on Split. Across like every region in pro play, he has a 0% pick rate on that map. Just don't do it. So yeah, having one map in the pool that you can't really pick him on is definitely a detriment. The other problem is his skill requirement. You can't just pick up Sova. Sova is a lifestyle. Sova is a commitment. You need to learn the lineups if you want to play him effectively. You also need really good map awareness and strategic knowledge, because a huge part of his strength is gathering early intel and then knowing what to do with it. With all that being said though, if you are truly a master of Sova, well then I would say he's probably overpowered in the right hands right now, even in solo queue. But very few players can reach that level, and for that reason we think in the middle of the S tier is a fair placement. Now above Sova in the S tier we have the duelist known as Reyna. Reyna is kind of weird in how she snuck into the meta. On release, she wasn't really picked that much in pro play, and often even in high ranked play, people would just kind of pick Phoenix instead of Reyna if they wanted a flash duelist. Well, that is, unless you're the pro player Scream. Seriously, if you want to learn how to play Reyna, just check out some of his games. He's probably the best Reyna in the world. Over time though, Reyna's pick rate has actually increased in all levels of play, which is a bit surprising as she's not that complicated of an agent and is kind of a pub stomper, so you'd think over time she'd actually become weaker as players figure out how to play against her. That is just simply not the case though, and if I had to give Reyna's biggest strength, it would actually have to be how stable and solid of a pick she is. I know, that's very weird to hear. Most players associate Reyna as a volatile solo queue agent, but it's really not the case. She's proven in high ranked games and pro play that she's actually a super solid pick that you can lock in on any map and be okay. For example, when Icebox was first released and we saw the first pro games being played on it, Reyna was one of the preferred duelists, and they would lock it in because of the fact that she's just that solid and you don't really need to learn lineups with her or specific ways to play her on maps. She just has that straightforward playstyle and a stable power curve across each map. So yeah, if your impression of Reyna being a volatile pick ever held you back from picking her up, trust me when I say lock in a couple games with her and you won't be disappointed. Next up, we have the agent with the most recent nerf, Jett. So on patch 2.1, Jett had her smoke duration reduced from 7 seconds to 4.5. Now don't get us wrong, this is actually a nerf as those long duration smokes were a leading factor in the duelist meta taking over, as she kind of functioned as a second controller. In fact, it's the main reason why she's not in the overpowered tier right now. Listen, you need to trust me on this. I know a lot of Jetts in your games probably make you want to rage quit with their performance, but in high elo and pro play, Jett is by far the biggest hard carry agent that you can pick. And I could list a ton of reasons for this, but instead I would rather highlight a key reason for her power that not a lot of players realize, and that is her ultimate. Jett's ultimate is one of the strongest ultimates in the game. First of all, you can actually ace entire teams with it. No other ult can do that. It's also insanely strong when it comes to economy because you save yourself from having to buy a rifle for that round. When you combine that with it only costing 6 ult points and the fact that Jett is a duelist, so she'll be getting a ton of kills, racking up those ult points, you'll have a ton of uptime on your daggers, basically just giving you an insane economy throughout the game. And this is very important, as a huge part of her strength comes from using the Operator, a 5,000 credit purchase. So hopefully you now have a bit more insight into how her ultimate is pretty key in her being so strong right now. Alright, and a shadow step above Jett we have Omen. Yes, Omen got hit with the Riot nerf bat on patch 2.0, but what you have to realize is just how insanely overpowered he was prior to that nerf. Omen was like god tier perfected Super Saiyan Blue. He was miles above any other agent in terms of strength and pick rate. In tournament play across every single region, he literally had a near 100% pick rate on all maps but Icebox. And so yes, the nerfs were significant, but when you're that strong to begin with, you have a lot of room to fall from. And that's why he's near the top of the S tier. He's still the strongest controller in the game, an essential role in every team composition on every single map, and he's also just so versatile. If you play Omen, you can basically smoke for the team, flash for the team, and often then just entry off your own flash or use teleport plays. Like you're pretty much every role at once, which is a massive asset in a solo queue environment. And if you're thinking, hold on a second, you left out the Sentinel's role like Cypher, well, have you ever pushed a site and then suddenly got hit by an Omen paranoia? Yeah, you and any teammates around you instantly died. Omen is super well-rounded and fills so many essential roles that a team needs. And finally, at the top of the S tier, we have none other than the Swiss Army knife of Valorant, Phoenix. What is there not to praise about Phoenix right now? He's got self-heals, he's an entry fragger, he's got flashes, he's got a molly, he's got a wall that cuts off sightlines. He's just so damn self-sufficient and arguably the best solo queue agent right now across all the different ranks. He's also a great beginner pick as you don't need to coordinate with your teammates at all and can just kind of focus on doing your own thing and improving. And if all of this wasn't enough, he's a great pick on all maps, very stable power curve. And you'd think that this jack-of-all-trades, master of none would be a detriment to being picked in pro play, where you'd kind of only be a solo queue agent, but that's not the case at all. Right now, if pro teams aren't running Breach as the support flash agent, then they're probably running Phoenix instead. And this leaves us with only one tier left, the overpowered tier, and for the first time, we've decided to leave it empty. The reason for this is that the overpowered tier is typically reserved for agents that are far above any other agent in strength, and an incoming nerf is likely guaranteed very soon. To put this in perspective, prior to Omen's nerfs on patch 2.0, he would be in the overpowered tier, and prior to Jett's nerf on patch 2.1, she was also in the overpowered tier. But right now, there really isn't any agents that stand so far above the rest that they deserve to be called overpowered. What do you guys think though? Would love to hear your thoughts on our rankings. Do you think there's an agent that should have been in the D tier or overpowered tier? Or maybe you disagree with some of our rankings. Let us know in the comment section below as we read all the comments and would love to see the community's opinions on this one. And remember, if you want to improve fast, win more gunfights, and get the rank you've always wanted, then there's nothing better than our hyper improvement system at skillcapped.com. Check it out, link in the description below. Otherwise, you know the deal, like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to keep up with the meta and get more premium guides with one goal in mind, helping you become a better player. We here at Skillcapped want to thank you for watching until the end, and we'll catch you in the next one.